Good morning, everyone. It has been such a long time since our last AMA. To be honest, I haven't had the time to secure a guest for this April. So instead, I did a video on founders' side project, and I have reached out to a lot of very interesting people to be joining me on the stream today and in the coming weeks. So we have some guests lined up. No worry, no more break or anything. In case you are new here today, we are right now live on many platforms, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Twitch, and of course YouTube, where you can find all my previous interviews. And whatever the platform you're using today, if you have any questions for our guest, you'll be able to ask anytime, anything in the chat. So, even if it's LinkedIn or Twitter, Twitter via Periscope or via Twitch or anything, you can just jump into the chat box and I'll make sure to pass your question to Alina, who is our guest today. So Alina Bassi is the CEO and co-founder of Kleiderly. And I'm going to let her introduce herself. Alina, it's good to have you here. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm good. I, like you, had a bit of a crazy morning, so I'm feeling like I'm starting to calm down now.
Good, that's perfect. Yeah, me too. I actually need to calm down a bit. I had such internet and electricity problem. I woke up so early, so I feel awake, but in the same time, kind of still, my head is all over the place. So
I
so
feel
happy
you.
to be here. Yeah, being on the stream is good to just get ready. Okay, we're doing it right now, so that's
Yeah,
perfect.
absolutely.
So to get started, Elena, do you want to maybe tell us a bit more about you, your background, and your startup also at the same time?
Yeah, sure. So my background is in chemical engineering, which I know is not a very typical career, but I had always had a passion for sustainability in particular. And I decided to study chemical engineering mainly because I was good at problem solving. I was good at putting things together. When I was a kid, I was really into like playing Lego or building things. So I was good at putting things together. And so my mum must have seen that and saw like the engineering type of degree and said, you'd be good at that. So I'm glad she helped me kind of steer my career in the right direction.
Does she also has a background in this type of careers or not at all? Okay,
No,
good,
not at all.
interesting.
But she was always really keen that like both my sister and I really fulfill our potential. And I was definitely the sort of child that even though I was really hardworking, I had a phase in my life, maybe, in your teenage years where you think, I don't really need to, I don't care what I'm going to do. And so without her direction, I definitely would not have probably even done half of the things I have done now. So I'm glad she made sure I actually did a degree that really aligned with what I wanted to do, which was sustainability. So the opportunity to go into chemical engineering, the way I saw it was I can combine things that I was good at with the passion of sustainability and go into renewable energy or biofuels or something. So I did the degree. I mean, it's not an easy degree to do. So the fact that I just chose to do it, I look back and think that was a really crazy decision because it was so hard to study. Went to, ended up doing pretty well though. So that was good. And then graduated with a master's and then went to work in initially the oil and gas world. Moved away from there, but ended up working mostly after that in waste, which is not what I had planned to do. But I ended up working a lot in household waste and coffee waste and how you can recycle this into different products. So I designed a factory that recycled textile waste and coffee waste into biofuels in the UK. And then having had 7 years experience as an engineer designing and building factories, I moved to Berlin, and moving to Berlin meant that it was kind of like a big reset in my career because Berlin is not necessarily the place for a chemical engineer, to be honest. There are factories in Berlin, but it's not like the industrial heavy city. It'd probably be other parts of Germany that would have been better for it. So then I ended up starting my own company to solve the problem of textile waste, having seen textile waste firsthand in Tanzania. So that was a very long story of what we do.
No, that's great, and more about your startup, because that's so it. We clearly see the progression in what leads you to Kleiderly, because Kleiderly. I need to get it right. Kleiderly. So what it is exactly that you're doing there? Because I have seen your website, but maybe not everyone took the time to do that before the stream.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, having worked in waste, I'd seen waste from lots and lots and lots of different streams. I've gone to lots of different waste sites, but I had never seen textile waste. And that was an interesting thing to think about. Only having gone on a trip to Tanzania to visit some family of mine, that I actually saw these markets where they're selling clothing secondhand from developed countries in Africa. And it made me think, like, as an engineer, why have I not seen waste before? And that led me to founding Kleiderly, because I realized how big a problem textile waste is, and we don't know anything about it. And even the fact that I have that background, even I didn't know enough about it. So I realized that 90% of everything we ever own or wear will end up in a landfill or an incinerator. And that is a huge environmental problem. We're producing 100 billion garments a year, and that number is meant to rise to 150 billion by 2050. And I think this is because it's just not a problem that's talked about. So I think what we do as developed countries is we just send it off to other countries and say, oh, we're doing a good thing, we're donating. But really, they don't really want all of our rubbish. Maybe they wanted the good stuff we sent them a few years ago, but now we send them, fast fashion items, H&M stuff, Primark stuff that maybe only lasts one wear. So having seen this huge problem and having a background in waste and recycling and building factories, I tried to develop my own process that could do something about it. So with Kleiderly, what we do is we recycle textile waste into a plastic alternative, meaning that your old t-shirt or your old jumper that you no longer wear could now be the frame of glasses that you're wearing, could be the material that your chair is made from, could be the tabletop that your laptop is sitting on. So I definitely took things in a completely different way to how textile recycling is seen. Usually people recycle fabric back into fabric, but we decided to try and solve a different problem. So with this, we solved two problems: the need for plastic derived from crude oil and diverting textiles away from landfills.
You're completely right about. I like your approach to the problem, and to the fact that you're saying no one really talks about it and no one knows about it. And to be honest, I've heard a lot about the problem of fast fashion and, all the problems around mass production and mass consumption. So I think that's something that is easy to understand. But naively, I thought there was some kind of recycling process in place. And until I went to your website and did additional research, I thought that it was okay. It wasn't necessarily a problem. So what's the difficulty of recycling textile, really? Is it a matter of money and that's why the big actors don't do it? Or is it more a matter of process? They didn't have the process in place that you invented. What was really the barriers for the big players in place to recycle? Because I guess, well, no, I'll let you answer that before jumping.
Sure. It's a multifaceted problem. There's problems all along the value chain of textiles. So, for example, there's waste already right at the beginning in the factories where they're producing clothing. And actually, that's one of the biggest sources of waste, which I only learn about now, that rolls of fabric that, say, a brand or a retailer would have bought, they don't know how to get rid of it and they don't want to give it to someone else. So that's a huge waste problem in itself, maybe because of overproduction, over-ordering. Then there's waste at the production floor where you produce the offcuts, right? When you're cutting different things into different shapes, you have offcuts, there's waste there. And that's a very difficult thing to actually reduce. Then you have waste when companies are overproducing, so they're producing or buying, and then not everyone is selling them, or there's defected goods. There's waste at that problem. And then there's waste at our end when we've used it and we don't know what to do with it anymore and we just donate it. So there's so many different issues. For fashion brands, the problem is that they well, it doesn't make sense for them to necessarily send something straight to recycling if it could be worn again. So say they have an unsold good, they could most likely, or you would hope so, that they would sell it on a secondhand market. But the problem is that most brands don't want to do that because it reduces the brand value. If you could get a Burberry shirt, for half the price on the second hand, why would you buy it full price? So in order for them to retain value, they have to somehow destroy the garments to make sure that no one else has access to them, which means that they're destroying them in a way that means that no one can ever wear this garment again. So it went through all of those production stages and then never even saw the light at the end of the tunnel because no one wore it. So I think fashion brands up until now haven't had to be responsible for their waste. They've been able to pass a problem on to someone else. Usually they can send it to someone else and they deal with it. But now, recently, there's new laws that are coming into place that mean that brands are no longer allowed to just send it straight to an incinerator. They're not allowed to send it to a landfill. And this is the reason why I think changes are happening now, but it's really recent because it wasn't a problem that was really talked about for a while. The other issue with recycling is what fabric is made from. So fabric is usually, when you're wearing something, most likely you've got something which is a blend of cotton or polyester or viscose or elastane or maybe some silk with a percentage of wool. And being able to recycle something that's blended is very tough because when you do fiber to fiber recycling, which is when you're turning polyester back into polyester, it's hard if that material initially contains something else, because how do you separate those fibers? So it's a very tough thing to do. And to be honest, like, yes, we're trying our best to do it, but there's no way I can solve this huge problem just with Kleiderly. Like this has to be, happening internationally in every different country. We need to think about how we can repurpose. And there are companies doing things. So for example, the traditional way to recycle would have been to turn it into pulp and then turn it into insulation for the building, or turn it into cleaning cloths, or turn it into the fibers that you need for a rug or a carpet. The problem is just that we're producing so much more now that, we will have endless amounts of carpets and rugs and insulation and cleaning cloths.
But does it also means that all these big companies that are, some of them have some kind of plans where you can bring back some old clothes that you're not wearing anymore, and they give you a bit of money or some reduction in store? Does this mean that it's just marketing bullshit and they don't do anything with that? Like if we bring our clothes to H&M, because I know they have a plan, or Uniqlo, I think they also do something. What are they doing with that? Or aren't they recycling the materials, or are they just dumping it?
So usually they work with other external recyclers, and the recycling company, what they will do is they'll first sort through it and see if there's anything useful that they can just sell secondhand. So it will never go straight to recycling, of course. It will have gone through a lot of people's hands to check, can it be worn? If it can, it'll be usually sold in a local vintage store. Or maybe they've got partnerships with local secondhand stores. So they sell it. That's the first thing they'll do. If they can't do anything with it after that, then it will, even in the sales process, if it's, they will decide what really works for like the local market. So again, it won't necessarily be things that, it will be things that will go into like this vintage store look. If it doesn't go there, then the second place it will go to is they will look at it and see, okay, if it's winter garments, it will go to Eastern Europe and be sold there. If it's summer garments, usually sent to countries within Africa or Asia. And then the next stream after that is that they'll look at it and say, okay, does it need a lot of repairing? If so, usually it's sent to countries such as Pakistan, where maybe they'll repair it themselves and then they'll sell it locally there too. And then finally, usually the white goods, those are the things that are then broken down and turned into insulation. So there's loads and loads and loads of different stages. But even and it's really difficult for them to do. So the fact that they do that already is good enough, that at least they're trying to do something, but there will still be stuff left over. And what happens when you've sent it to Eastern Europe, or you've sent it to Africa, or you've sent it to the vintage store and no one sold it? That's the further step that no one thinks about. So for me, textile recycling, or maybe even just recycling in general, is passing the problem on to someone else in the supply chain and not dealing with it yourself.
We actually have some interesting question on the chat, especially from David Bolton on LinkedIn, who asked about how your product work. And I think the big questions around that is also where does the textile come from? Do you have specific requirement? Does your process allows you to work with different materials? You mentioned earlier that it's very hard to process materials that are like different type of materials and different type of fibers. Can you actually tackle this challenge, or do you have to have specific requirements and work with maybe specific textile providers who will select for you, maybe do some kind of pre-selection? How does this all work for you?
So I think that's usually why I mention it, because that's our biggest USP, is that we can recycle fabric blends. So far we know that we can recycle blends containing polyester, cotton, viscose, and elastane. But these 4 fabrics make up 80% of the fabrics that are used now. And usually if they're silk or wool, then that's fabric that has a higher value, and so usually wouldn't necessarily be sent for recycling, because silk is expensive, for example. So we can recycle those 4 fabrics, and we can collect from different parts of the supply chain. So as I mentioned, there's so many different parts of the supply chain. Our first port of call to doing this was to work with local charities. So we have partnerships with charities in Berlin and in Germany that receive donations from normal people like us, who are just giving it to them. And their job is to donate to the homeless. So they go through each garment that we give them, and they say, is this good enough to be worn by someone? And the problem that they said they see is that just a small charity in Berlin, and there's multiple locations of this kind of place, and of course there's also loads and loads of different containers, but just this one small charity gets 10,000 kilos of textiles every week. And that is a lot of textiles. And then they said that of all the donations they get, 80% cannot be donated. And their problem is also that most of the homeless people they donate to are men, which might not necessarily be like, I'm not saying that all homeless people are men, but that's their audience. And most of their donations are from women and children. So they don't know what to do with a lot of the stuff that they get. So the way we work with them is they sort through the garments already, because they have to do so. And if they find that they cannot donate it to someone, then they put it in the Kleiderly box, and that's how we receive it. And I like taking textiles from this end, because I know at that point that garment had no more life. I mean, it had gone through the rounds, it's been bought, it's been worn, it's been donated. It's not going to go anywhere else. But we can also work with retailers. We can also work with, and we get requests all the time for companies producing all sorts of different types of textiles, because textiles isn't everything, right? It's not just in fashion, but it's also in workwear, it's also in uniforms, it's also in home furnishings. We can take from all these different parts. But our first port of call has always been, how can we help the charities? Because that's really at that point when it's not going to go anywhere else.
And talking about not just the first part, which is getting the textile and the recycling part, then you create a new material that is going to be used to create new products. So right now you're focusing on sunglasses, according to your website. Could you also sell this material directly to be used by other company, or is your plan to really continue produce your own product? And then also David asked about the price of this new material compared to oil-based plastic. How does this compare?
Yeah. So we can sell to plastics users, and we have already done so. So last year we were selling our material to companies producing clothing hangers. So we have clothing hangers made from our material. We also partnered with a Paris-based brand that produces security tags, which are made out of plastic, but it's a plastic usage that you don't think about in the fashion industry. So in the hanger case, we're replacing polystyrene. In the tags, we're replacing ABS plastic. And then we decided that we would actually just produce our own products, because I think that the biggest way for us to have an impact, besides obviously replacing plastic and selling it, is also to actually educate the end consumer on, this was your old t-shirt, now you're wearing it as a pair of glasses, so that's not waste. Don't waste it, and don't just go and buy fast fashion items. So what we say is, we can and we do sell the raw material, but our bigger focus is on building our direct consumer ecosystem. So when we work with plastics manufacturers, we give them the material, we give them the recipes. This is exactly how you use it. But the difficulty is, of course, even though my background is building factories, unless you have one, the price point is you're never going to achieve economies of scale. So right now, our price is double the price of oil-based plastics, which is why it's very hard for us to just sell the raw material, because already that means that anyone who's using plastics already had to have bought it for twice the price. And there's not enough incentive for all companies to do so. Of course, some are very sustainability focused and want to do this, but I totally understand if they have a price point to hit and they can't suddenly pay double.
And apart from the price, is there any specific requirement in terms of for them to use this material? Do they need to adapt their process? Do they need to change anything? And also, Yinshi asks if in terms of performance, if this type of plastic is different, I guess in terms of maybe porosity or flexibility, or is it more fragile or not?
Yeah. So, wait, the first bit of the question was around, sorry, I forgot the first bit of the question.
If the factories need to adapt in any way the process to work with this material.
Yeah. So no, they don't. Well, yeah, they do. They can use the same machine. So they don't need to buy a new machine, which is important, but they don't have to change a lot. So we would give them a data sheet, and that has essentially how you would, I don't know, bake bread in the oven. It's the same. For this type of bread or this type of material, you use these settings, and this is how you use it, and this is how much time you have to process it. So it behaves differently, of course. It has a lower melting point than traditional oil-based plastics. And the second part of your question,
it's Yinshi asking about the performance of the plastic, if it's the same, if it really equals the usual plastic.
Yeah, so in clothing hangers, we were replacing polystyrene, and it's definitely stronger than polystyrene. I think it's 30% stronger. Then in ABS plastic, so where we're replacing plastic and security tags, ABS is usually used. It's a very strong plastic, and we're 90% as strong as ABS. And then now with acetate, because we're replacing acetate in glasses, to be honest, I should have actually bought my products right here. Prepared this morning, as I mentioned, but when you look at it, you can't tell unless, acetate is usually clear, so yes, you can tell that it's not see-through, it's not transparent, but you can't tell very well that it's something completely different.
Okay. And you mentioned also the need for having your own plant and factory. So I guess if you said that you will need to have that, that means that you don't have a factory at the moment. And for a startup, that's just crazy thinking about needing to have that in place. That would mean a crazy amount of money, right?
Yeah. So at the moment we don't, and I've built factories before. I know how tough it is, and I know how hard it is to get funding to even do that. So I don't know if that will be our plan. To be honest, it's very hard to say. I think that the way we're doing it now, where we do batch production, is easier. And to be honest, if you're raising investment, most VCs or traditional investors don't give you money for building factories. It's a very, very tough way to raise money.
Talking about fundraising, well, of course, I ask you about that. Have you already had a round in place? I see that you also announced a crowdfunding. I don't know if it's already started or not, or about to start, but it's interesting because I have seen a lot of investors, especially in Europe, being publicly very interested in sustainable startups, but then I'm very curious to hear about the reality, if there is a gap between what people say and where they actually put their money, and the difference in terms of fundraising.
So obviously my experience won't be the same as everyone else's, so I don't ever want anyone to think like blanket, this is exactly what happens, of course. My experience personally has been that it's very, very, very tough to raise money for a hardware or a hard component. I think if we had a software element to our process, it would have been easier for us to fundraise, but we don't. And it doesn't make sense to do so either. So I really want to focus on this specific tangible solution. And to do so, it's very hard to raise money, because even if investors are saying they want to invest in sustainability, they usually put money behind a software that's calculating CO2 emissions. And everyone's doing that at the moment. And yes, we need those softwares to do carbon calculations. But at the same time, once we've calculated the carbon, what are we going to do about it after that? So I found it really tough to fundraise. And at the moment, still till now, we're entirely bootstrapped, which is so tough. We've been lucky that I think because we're focusing on such an important topic, we've gotten government money, government grants, and that's been very, very helpful. But traditional fundraising has not been easy for us. But there's also probably other issues associated with maybe the fact that it was my first time and I wasn't ready, and now having done it once and now doing it the second time and know what to do. So it's not necessarily just the issue. It could have also just been that maybe I wasn't doing it in the right way. So I feel so much more prepared now, having done it once and knowing what to do. So that's why we decided to do a crowd investment round, because I think that maybe we're just not a traditional VC model where we're going to grow 10x like a standard, software-based company would do, and we will grow really quickly. But it's just a different type of funding model where we are looking for smaller angels and angel investors who help us get through this journey and help us to grow. And we're also looking for people who genuinely care about the cause. So when I look to speak to an investor, it's not just about are they going to give me money? It's also about, do I believe that they truly understand why I'm doing this? Are they also behind the mission? Because if they're not, then we're just not aligned on the company. So the great thing about crowd investment is we've been supported by Climate Kick, which is the EU fund that supports climate impact startups. And they wanted to support 3 startups to raise investment, and they chose us to be one of the startups to support at the beginning. And so having the kind of tick in the box from Climate Kick, and having their support and having them do these climate impact forecasting on us and calculating the CO2 we save has been really beneficial, because for us, it's that credibility that maybe we need to get investment. And Seeders is an interesting platform because anyone and everyone can invest over 10 euros or 10 pounds. And I have a lot of people who really care about the cause and really want to support us, but may not be, a high net worth individual who has 100, 200 grand just sitting in their back pocket. So it's great to give everyone a way to be part of that movement and part of the mission, even if they're not necessarily from a traditional investment background.
How did you start looking at and preparing this equity fundraising, crowd equity fundraising? Because it's very different from traditional fundraising where you have lots of one-to-one catch-up. Here you have to really talk to the crowd and get more people to invest, even though I think the platform itself, it helps a lot, but you can't just rely on that. And so what did you do to prepare for this equity fundraising? And also, I love Seeders. I've been using equity crowdfunding myself, just investing here and there. So I think it's a fantastic way to support some project.
Yeah. So we're in the middle of it right now. So it's an interesting time. I've learned so much from it because it's a very different type of investment. you put the word out there that you're doing this. And the good thing is, like, because of Climate Kick supporting us too, we've had a lot of support from their end to prepare the video and all the tools and everything you need. And initially, just the Cedars due diligence, by the way, is so detailed that at least, like, from this, I have learned that not any company goes on Cedars. It might look like it, but it's like they really do every single point of due diligence they can on you. So at least if you're investing on there, you know that your money's not just going to someone who doesn't really have a company. So just putting that out there. With getting people on board. So I had already spoken to a lot of investors last year. So this was a good way for me to get back in contact with especially smaller angels who wanted to give us smaller tickets. And it's great for me to be able to finally give them a way to do that, because the paperwork I would have had to have done to get all these small tickets myself would have been really arduous. So it's great to have a way that they can all support us. And we've, in a way, like, as Kleiderly, we've developed a really good network within Berlin specifically, where we have so many supporters, and I'm so grateful for that. So many mentors, advisors, and supporters who really care about what we're doing. And so, one, it was easier to get that crowd going because we've got these people already supporting us. Just naturally, maybe just from seeing the journey. But there's a lot of work that you need to do on the side. You need to find anchor investors, and you need to find, like, sort of like the people who will be taking the biggest chunk of your fundraise. So for that, I'm having to do a lot of asking for warm introductions, because that's the best way to get to speak to investors. Sometimes a lot of cold emailing as well. But to be honest, I think that's having spoken to a lot of investors now, they've all said they don't really like cold emails, and they much prefer if they've had a warm introduction. Having done a lot of accelerator programs and met a lot of people, I now realize that, like, that network effect is very important. So if I know someone who knows an investor, it's better that that person introduces me to them. So I have to do a lot of homework, to look at what things they've invested in before. Is this something that they even do they invest in sustainability, or is that not their area of expertise at all? And then contact them. But I feel like I think I've managed to streamline this process a lot now compared to what I did at the beginning.
We're always learning. It's a journey. You're always learning from whatever you're doing. You didn't necessarily did it wrong first, but now you have this knowledge, and so you know exactly what to do better and what to improve and how to do that. Yes, exactly. It's funny. I thought because you're in Berlin, and in Germany there's usually a bit more factories, and I thought that it would have been slightly easier to talk to investors about investing in something physical and hardware compared to some other places like London, but it doesn't seem to be that easy either, right?
No, so Germany's an interesting country. I really like the way it's set up, in the way that industry is more based in the south or in the west. So, for example, if I had gone and become a chemical engineer and really gone down that route in Germany, I would have ideally, most likely, have found a job in the south, or I'd have found it in Düsseldorf, Dortmund, Cologne area. And so Berlin traditionally just has such a different history, of course. And then it's now this thriving startup scene that is so exciting and new, and so many new things are happening. But it's mostly in the software space, or in or SaaS. So it's the best place to be for having a startup, but probably not necessarily for the kind of startup I have.
Yinchi also asks about if there's any international issue with crowdfunding for equity backers, if everyone has to actually be in Europe or from a specific country.
No, so that's the good thing about Cedars, and I think that's probably why Climate Kick chose this, because Cedars, I think, is originally from the UK but has this European arm. And all of the startups that are chosen are based in Europe, but you can invest from anywhere. So I already know people who will be investing in us from America, from Canada, and I know that you just need to sign up to the platform. But besides that, it's fairly simple. And the good thing about it is in traditional investment, usually you wait till that company exits, or you wait till something specific happens for you to get your money back. But on Seedrs, you can actually have a secondary market. So you can, if you decide all of a sudden, I need that £1,000 that I put into that company, you can get it back and sell your shares on the secondary market. Weirdly enough, I was speaking to a mentor of mine yesterday, and he told me that 5 years ago, he just put £1,000 in a startup that he saw on Seedrs. And just recently they sold for 20 million, and he made a really good chunk of money from it. And it was very impressive. I mean, just that £1,000 that he put in a few years ago has, gotten him a lot of money, which is great. So it was good to see how investors see that side.
Yes, and also I think because it's as you mentioned, it's a lot of smaller angels, people who may not think that they could right now go out and invest themselves on their own in a startup. Using such a platform, it's actually a good way, a good first step before investing directly in other companies. But also, it's a good way to test yourself and to know what you're really interested in, because just looking at different markets and saying publicly, oh yeah, I found this area interesting, is something, but putting your own money into a company in a specific space is a different step. And so it's also a very interesting process when you think about your own investment, where you want to put your money and what you want to support and what you're eager to support. So I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, especially because at the moment there's a lot of people investing in, well, you've seen the stock market, you've seen how crazy it is. So people want to put their money somewhere, and I think it's important to do that homework actually on Seedrs beforehand, because it's very hard from a founder's perspective if you're the first person that someone's put a really big ticket behind, if they've had no experience, and especially if they come from, say, for example, a corporate background. They may not necessarily fully understand the troubles of having a startup. So if they've done it before, or they've had some experience with startups before, Seedrs is a really nice soft way for them to get that experience without having to put a huge amount of money behind a company.
You also mentioned that you've been part of a bunch of programs. I think I saw on your profile Google for Startups, Plug and Play, and a bunch of other programs.
Yeah.
And I know from experience that there is always something to take from the different programs, but sometimes you can feel a bit isolated in programs that are not necessarily for your industry or for your space or for your specific approach. And because you are doing hardware, not software, because you are also doing kind of tech for good, or tackling really sustainability and the circular economy, were there any difference for you the way you were part of these programs? Any way that you had to kind of adapt the learnings and everything from this program? And would you recommend to people looking at building a company like yours in the same kind of industries or hardware to join these more general programs?
I think it's really difficult. Like you said, everyone has a different experience. The first program I ever did was actually funded by the state of Berlin. And that was very important to me. That program was focused on sustainability, but because I didn't have a network in Berlin at the time, it was important for me to start to meet a lot of people here. Like, I have to build my network of mentors, advisors, investors, lawyers, founders. So that program was perfect for that. Maybe not necessarily for exactly what I do, but that served a great purpose and gave me funding. The second program I did was the Google for Startups program. And whilst that is not really focused on sustainability or even hardware, the biggest issue, again, I found was not knowing, because it was early on in the journey, not knowing enough people to share the experience with, to get their learnings from. And that program introduced me to 20 other women founding startups in Europe. And now some of my closest friends are from that group. And so I'm so grateful to have done that program, because actually peer-to-peer learning is huge in the startup world. And I learn every day that I speak to a founder friend of mine. So again, maybe not necessarily perfect for sustainability, but at the same time, you need to learn from other people's journeys. And so that was very, very helpful. And also generally just the people at Google are incredible and very well connected. And that's very beneficial. The last program I did, which was very focused on what I do, is the plug and play program. And this was based around getting you customers. So it's based in Paris. There's loads of fashion brands that are part of the program, and they essentially choose the startups that they want to work with to go on the program. And that was great because all of a sudden you've got a pool of potential customers and you're being introduced to them weekly. So I would really recommend that program for anyone working within the fashion space, even if it is recycling or sustainability, because you get the chance to learn from the brands that you're working with. Now, having done I feel like every program served its purpose at the time, and it was good for the beginning of the journey to learn. But now, now when you're really in the depths of it, in the trenches, there's absolutely no time to do something like an accelerator. But at the beginning, I think it's the best way for you to figure things out and put puzzle pieces together.
Yeah, I would even add to that, especially if they're free or if they don't take equity, because I've seen too many founders sometimes doing one program after another, and I think it can be very interesting. You always have something to take from that, but in the same time, you need to be careful about your equity. And I found that the only way. The only situation where I found founders were really disappointed by some accelerators or some programs is when they actually have to pay for a lot of equity or cash, and that's when you think, well, actually, am I really getting my money back on that or not? But there are lots of different programs, and I think everyone think about the big ones like Google or Textiles, but there are actually so many other programs out there that it's good to understand and to take the time before jumping everywhere. What's really good for you at this specific stage. Like I've seen some people sometimes joining some Textiles or trying to, but they were too early, or some accelerators that are ready to accelerate you. And if you're still at your ideation stage, you don't need to be accelerated, right?
No, exactly. And I think that's exactly right. So one thing I'm really glad about is none of the programs that took equity. So that was great. But you can be in the wrong program at the wrong stage, and that doesn't make any sense to you. So really do your homework around what the program is going to do for you. I mean, most likely, so actually, even before that, I had applied for other programs and didn't get it. And now looking back, I realized, well, yeah, actually, that wouldn't have been right for me at the time. So it was a good thing. But because the ideation phase can sometimes be so long, you think you're much more developed than you are. You think, no, I've figured out the idea, I know it, but there's so much you need to figure out before you're ready to apply for an accelerator.
So true. I didn't ask you, but what's the size composition of your team today? Because I've seen some people on your website, so you're not just by yourself.
Yeah, no, we're 7 now, and I love having a team. I really enjoy it. I mean, it's been really strange because some of them I've never met in person now because of COVID, but I actually really enjoy it. I think a lot of people do say to me, oh, is it difficult to build relationships online? I personally don't have a problem with it at all, and I feel like I've managed to develop some really deep relationships during COVID. But I know that not everyone can do so, and it's not the same for everyone. So I totally understand if people don't feel comfortable, working for a company remotely, but I actually really enjoy it.
I love that. Yes, I used to work in lots of different companies, fully remote. And I think some questions can arise when you have part of the company that is not remote. But if you have from day one all the system in place to be remote, then you have less frictions because everyone is in the same boat. So you don't really look at what's going on in the office, and you don't feel like you're missing something out.
Yeah, and we had an office last year. I was doing the whole thing of going to an office. And one thing I realized is for myself personally, I work my best when I am really confined with absolutely no distraction, no one around me. And I can just focus very easily at home. I don't get distracted by a computer. I don't get a TV or anything. I can just work all day and night, to be honest, by myself and a computer. But in an office space, I don't I feel like I need to interact with people, which is as good as human, but then it also means that I'm not focusing on getting my work done. So I actually really enjoy being able to work remotely because I can choose when I speak to people, still take the time, but have that focus, which you really need in early founder stages.
I'm 100% behind you on that. That's the same for me. So earlier today, you mentioned your journey and how you came across the problem you're solving, and I found everything really work together. Like you're really telling a story. Now I'm very curious also to hear about how you got from getting the idea to actually thinking, well, actually I can do it, because you said it yourself. You worked as an engineer for different companies, building factories, doing a bunch of things, but then jumping in the entrepreneurial adventure is something, right? You really get into it. What made you really make the jump, and how did you think, okay, actually I can actually do that?
Oh, it was tough. It was really tough. I think at the beginning, I think I always knew. I think it was after working in the startup I did in London, where I was working on the coffee waste plant, and I was working fairly closely at times with the founder. And I remember working there and thinking, well, what he's doing seems amazing, and the fact that he had this vision for reusing coffee waste and turning it into a biofuel, and then producing biodiesel and running a London bus, but he doesn't even have an engineering background. That is incredible. And if I could do something like that, but use my actual background, that would be great. So I definitely wanted to, but it wasn't the right time. I had to go through lots of years of working hard and learning a lot before, and I'm really glad I did. Then I think usually when things change in your life, I think it's a good thing. So this change of moving countries and not really being in your day-to-day routine, it was disruptive, so much so that it made me completely like change my perspective on things, because where I was thinking, oh, I can just go and find another engineering job, it really started to make me think, do I want to do another engineering job? Or is this the perfect time to start a company? I've worked for 7 years now. I know how I should do it, but I wasn't 100% convinced. Then the idea had come to me because of the trip, and I'm just someone who has a lot of ideas, but usually not necessarily thinking that this is something I know about personally. And if it's not, then how can I do it? But this was the idea that I had that combined my knowledge, combined my interest, combined the sustainability angle, and the textile industry or fashion in general is very interesting. So I thought, this is technically the ideal startup for me to found, because it encompasses all of those things. If I can do this, then it's the right thing to do. But it took a really long time. I had to really convince myself that I should just not have a full-time job, and I should not have that security, and I should just take the plunge. Looking back now, I think it was the best thing I ever did. And even though it's a tough journey, I really enjoy it. I've learned so much. And I think it was the right time in my life to do it, because having worked for a long time, if I had waited, I don't think I would have done that. So I think it was a good time because I had experience from working, but I also didn't have any responsibility to not take the plunge.
Yes. And now, I guess, looking back, you can't really get back to a traditional job. Once you make your mind, once you're like, okay, I'm just going to follow what I want to do, you can't really think about going back unless you would have to. But yeah.
So when I did basically what I did is, because I'm so used to getting a monthly salary and I'd done so for so many years, I thought, okay, if I do this accelerator program, they will give me a monthly salary, and that can give me these few months to figure out if I can do it, or at least if this is right for me. So I'm giving myself time, and if it doesn't work out, it's fine. I can always go back. So that was my thinking. I was trying to be safe. But of course, once you start the journey, you're not going to go back, because it's such an exciting one. And yes, it has huge ups and downs, but it's a longer journey and it requires full commitment. And I needed to have the taste before I took the plunge.
I also saw on your profile on, I think on LinkedIn, that you have been featured in the Forbes 30 under 30 in 2020. And well, it's super fancy and everyone is after that. I'm wondering, did it really help you, or did it actually put more pressure on you to get some results? Because sometimes you have a very different stage of founders being featured, and so it was in 2020, so you were still well earlier than you are right now. So I'm wondering if it actually was a good thing.
I think, well, one, I'm so grateful for it because it's a huge honor to be in the industry and manufacturing list, which is my background. So to be in that list is great. Not in the founder list, but in the really what my background is and what my or was. So I was really grateful for it. I don't think it actually put pressure. I actually think it really helped me because maybe at the time it's sometimes just helpful to have external acknowledgement of what you're doing, not in your day-to-day lives, but this is people who they don't know you. So they're having to assess you from all sorts of different angles to figure out if you're worthy of being in that list. So that acknowledgement meant that all of a sudden I had companies reaching out to us that I never thought I would have had the chance to speak to, and they were reaching out to me after seeing the list. So it was actually hugely beneficial. And even now, I think it just gives a certain credibility that helped me to take the next steps I needed to as a founder. So yeah, no, I don't feel any pressure of any sort, but it could have been also because it happened during COVID time. So it's not like I really saw many people.
You can handle suddenly a big movement of people coming to you because it's you don't have to juggle that with the networking with
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think I asked you all my question. I'm sorry, Yinshi, I skipped yours, but we are running out of time. Maybe you can answer by a yes or no. Yinshi asked about if your material could be suitable for 3D printers.
It's a hard one to say yes.
I'm really sorry for that.
Theoretically, yes, but we've not tested it.
Okay, great. Well, Yinshi, if you want to follow up with Alina, Alina, where can we find you online?
All the social channels. So I've got LinkedIn, of course. LinkedIn, you just find Alina Bassi. On Instagram as well. Twitter too, but Twitter, I think my handle is Alina Bassi1.
Yes, you have one.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And do you have any, maybe to finish on a tip or something actionable, any recommendation for founders building a startup, part of the circular economy, maybe some communities to join or online groups or any recommendations?
In circular economy specifically, so I've joined lots of different organizations, but mostly have revolved around green tech or sustainability. So there's Green Tech Alliance, there's Leaders for Climate Action, there's a new one that I'm actually part of the steering committee of, which we're moving to the EU now, which is from America, called Climate Change Makers. So anyone who involved in the climate or sustainability space, I would recommend that. My tip for founders is find something you're really passionate about, like genuinely really think needs to be in the world, because it's a really tough journey. And if you don't have that like intrinsic purpose that this has to be out there, then it'll be easy to give up. And when you have a purpose, you're not going to give up.
I love that, and I completely agree. Well, thank you so much, Alina. I don't want to take too much of your time, but thank you so much for taking the time to share your journey with me. I love that, and I've learned a lot, so I find it really fascinating.
Thank you so much for me.
If anyone for some reason missed the first part of the interview, or if you want to share maybe this interview later on, it's going to be available on my YouTube channel on Monday afternoon. That's when I start sharing everywhere. So if you also not subscribed to the YouTube channel, check it out, because that's where you can find all the previous interviews, and that is the best way to support the channel. The next AMA will be in 2 weeks. I will be announcing it on Twitter, which is my main social media. If you need to connect or anything, feel free to reach out there, or to join the Discord group. I created a Discord. It's a small community, but if you're building something, want some feedback, want to just talk about it off stream, feel free to join. Usually the link is supposed to be a bit everywhere, so depending on the platform, if you're coming from a LinkedIn, maybe it's not super straightforward. But if you check my I don't know, the YouTube or the Twitch channel, you can find the link super straightforward. That's it for me. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy this weekend, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.